20 years ago, the smell of death was different. Theron remembered that with crystalline clarity as he stood over the bodies of the rogue pack, their blood soaking into the earth like some terrible baptism. He was 18 then, barely more than a boy, his father's sword still warm in his hand from the killing stroke that had ended the pack leader's life. The village they had slaughtered lay behind them. Smoke still rose from burned cottages. Bodies of humans, women and children mostly, sprawled in positions that spoke of desperate flight and hopeless resistance. The rogue pack had torn through them like wolves through sheep, and the stench of spilled intestines and burned flesh painted the air with a sickness that would never fully leave Theron's memory. His father stood beside him, the old Alpha King, his silver hair matted with blood that was not his own. The man's face carried the weight of command like a physical burden, lines carved deep around eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. Power without restraint is tyranny, son. The old king's voice had been quiet, almost gentle, as he surveyed the carnage his own warriors had inflicted upon the rogues. We are guardians, not conquerors. The moment we forget that, we become the very monsters humans fear we are. Theron had looked at his father then, at the weariness in those ancient eyes, and understood something fundamental about leadership. It was not the strength to kill that defined a king. It was the wisdom to know when killing was necessary, and the courage to carry that weight afterward. I will build a kingdom where strength serves the weak, Theron had sworn that day, his hand over his heart, his voice steady despite the trembling in his limbs. Where power protects rather than conquers. His father had smiled, sad and knowing. Then you will be a better king than I was. Now, 20 years later, Theron stood in the war room of Shadow Peak Palace and understood his father's sadness with perfect, terrible clarity. The weight of leadership was not the glory of victory. It was the endless accumulation of choices, each one measured in lives saved or lost, and the knowledge that no matter how hard you tried, you would never save them all. The war room was a circular chamber carved from the living rock of the mountain itself. Maps covered every wall, territories marked in silver ink, trade routes traced in gold, danger zones shaded in red. The table at the center was ancient oak, scarred with the marks of 1,000 strategy sessions, and around it stood the men who had become extensions of Theron's will. Marcus occupied the seat to his right, a grizzled veteran of 50 winters who had lost his left eye to a silver blade during the border wars. He wore the empty socket like a badge of honor, refusing the offered eye patch, and his remaining eye was sharp enough to see through any deception. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and his hands bore the calluses of a man who had held weapons longer than some soldiers had been alive. Intelligence confirms it, Marcus said, his voice rough as gravel. Trafficking ring operating in the Western Territories. At least 15 disappearances in the last 3 months. Werewolf and human both. Across from Marcus sat Cale, 30 years old, and built like violence itself. He was the commander of Theron's special forces, the blade in the dark, the silent death that came for enemies who thought themselves safe. His face was unmarked, unremarkable, the kind of face that could disappear into any crowd, but his eyes held the flat, measuring stare of a predator. "Children," Cale said, and the single word carried more weight than a speech. "Your Majesty, the youngest we know of is 14, a girl named Mira, taken from her family's farm 3 weeks ago." Theron's hands curled into fists on the table. The wood creaked under the pressure. Around the room his counselors shifted, recognizing the signs of his wolf rising to the surface. The beast inside him was never far from consciousness, a constant presence that demanded blood for every injustice, death for every enemy. 20 years of kingship had taught him to control it, to channel that rage into calculated action rather than blind violence. But sometimes control was difficult. Captain Darius leaned forward, his weathered face creased with concern. He was 40 years old, broad-shouldered and battle-scarred, and he had saved Theron's life twice in his many decades. They had fought together, bled together, mourned fallen brothers together. If Theron trusted anyone in this world, it was Darius. "Give the order," Darius said quietly. "We will burn them out, every last one of them." Theron wanted to. Every instinct screamed for immediate action, for overwhelming force, for the kind of savage justice that would make his enemies regret the day they had touched his people. But leadership was not about satisfying instinct. It was about choosing the action that would save the most lives, even when that choice tasted like ash. A military solution risks war with the human provinces, Theron said, forcing his voice to remain level. We cannot simply raid their settlements without evidence, without political cover. The peace we have built is fragile enough already. Marcus nodded. You need a human face for this. Someone who can navigate human settlements, ask questions without raising alarm. Someone expendable. The word hung in the air like a curse. Theron's jaw tightened. I do not use expendable people. Find me someone valuable. Valuable how? Marcus asked. What exactly are you looking for? Someone who understands what it means to be underestimated, Theron said slowly, the idea forming even as he spoke. Someone who has survived in hostile territory. Someone with nothing to lose and everything to prove. Marcus studied him with that single penetrating eye. You are talking about someone desperate. Desperation makes people unpredictable. It also makes them brave, Theron countered, and we need bravery more than we need predictability right now. Cale spoke up, his voice as cold and precise as a blade. There are rumors. Lord Thorne's daughter. Intelligence suggests the family has been targeted by this Victor Grayson, the creditor behind the trafficking operation. If she is who we think she is, she may be in immediate danger. Theron felt something shift in his chest, a premonition perhaps, or simply the weight of decisions settling into place. Eleanor Silvermoon's daughter. The thought carried complex emotions. Eleanor had been Silvermoon clan, one of their own, until she had fallen in love with a human and left their world behind. Her choice had been seen as betrayal by some, tragedy by others, but Theron had always admired the courage it took to choose love over duty. If her daughter inherited even a fraction of that strength, she might be exactly what he needed. Where is she now? Theron asked. Marcus consulted a paper. Attending a ball tonight. Her father is announcing her engagement to Victor Grayson. The marriage is meant to settle his gambling debts. Theron stood abruptly, decision crystallizing. Then I will attend this ball. If she is in danger, I will offer protection. If she is willing, I will offer her a choice. Your Majesty, Darius said carefully, attending a human social event without proper security, without advanced planning, it is risky. Everything worth doing is risky, Theron said. Prepare a small escort. We leave within the hour. As his advisors departed to make arrangements, Theron remained in the war room, staring at the maps that represented his kingdom. 20 years he had ruled. 20 years of holding the line between civilization and chaos, of making impossible choices, of carrying the weight of every life lost under his watch. He thought of the young guard he had left behind 5 years ago, ordered to hold a position while the main force retreated. The boy had been 20, barely trained, and Theron could still hear his screams echoing across the battlefield as the enemy tortured him for information he did not possess. The boy had died because Theron had made a command decision. The many over the few, the mission over the individual, the right choice strategically. He heard those screams in every quiet moment. That was leadership. That was the price of the crown. And tonight, he would go to a ball and perhaps find someone else willing to pay that price. The weight settled a little heavier on his shoulders. It always did. 5 years ago, when Lyanna was 15 years old, she learned that death came quietly. Her mother's final hours were not dramatic or theatrical. There was no sweeping music, no profound speeches, just the slow, inevitable dimming of a light that had burned too brightly for this world. Eleanor Thorne lay in her bed, the fever having consumed her from within, and Lyanna held her hand with desperate strength, as if somehow she could anchor her mother to life through sheer force of will. The fireplace crackled softly. Candles burned low. Somewhere in the house, servants moved with hushed steps, preparing for the morning that everyone knew was coming. You have my gift, darling. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper, each word costing her precious breath. You feel what others feel. Use it to build bridges, not walls. What gift, Mama? Lyanna had asked, confused and terrified and not ready at all. I do not understand. Eleanor's eyes, once so bright and knowing, struggled to focus. Her hand trembled in Lyanna's grasp. You will, sweet girl. When the time comes, you will understand everything. Those were her last words. She died as the candles guttered, and Lyanna had sat there holding her hand long after the warmth had fled, trying to understand a gift she could not name and a future she could not see. Her father, Lord Thorne, had wept. Real tears, genuine grief. For perhaps 6 months, he had been the father she remembered from childhood, kind and present and whole. Then he had married Celeste, and everything had changed. Now, 5 years later, Lyanna stood in her bedroom and watched servants prepare her for her own funeral. That was how it felt, being dressed for her engagement ball, like being prepared for burial. The gown was beautiful, she could admit that objectively, silk the color of fresh cream, embroidered with silver thread, cut to emphasize curves she had never asked to be emphasized. Her pale blonde hair was being twisted into an elaborate arrangement that pulled tight enough to make her scalp ache. In the mirror, a stranger stared back at her. Beautiful, polished, empty. The door opened without a knock. Celeste swept in, resplendent in crimson silk, her dark hair perfectly coiffed, her smile sharp as broken glass. "You look pale," she said, her voice carrying that particular blend of false concern and real threat that Lyanna had learned to recognize. "Surely you are not having second thoughts about Damien. Your father is quite pleased with the arrangement." Lyanna's hands clenched in her lap. "Victor," she corrected quietly. "His name is Victor Grayson, not Damien." Celeste waved a dismissive hand. "Victor, Damien, what does it matter? He is wealthy, influential, and willing to overlook your family's financial embarrassments. You should be grateful." Grateful. The word tasted like poison. Lyanna had found her father's ledgers 3 weeks ago, hidden in his study. The debts were real enough, certainly, but they were not from gambling. They were systematic loans, structured specifically to create dependency, each one drawing her family deeper into obligation. Victor Grayson had spent 3 years engineering their desperation, and now he was here to collect his prize. "The ballroom will be full of important people tonight," Celeste continued, adjusting Lyanna's necklace with cold fingers. "Do try to smile, won't you? People are watching." People were always watching. That was the curse of being a commodity. Your value was measured in how well you performed, how gracefully you accepted your circumstances, how little trouble you caused. Lyanna had spent 5 years being measured and found wanting. Too compassionate, too questioning, too much like her mother, and not enough like the empty doll her father needed her to be. "I will do my duty," Lyanna said, the words automatic, meaningless. Celeste smiled, satisfied, and swept out again. The servants finished their work in silence and departed, leaving Lyanna alone with the stranger in the mirror. She touched the silver locket at her throat, hidden beneath the elaborate necklace Celeste had chosen. It was the only piece of her mother she had left. Eleanor's last gift, given with trembling hands and urgent eyes. "Compassion is not weakness," her mother had whispered. "When the world tries to make you small, choose kindness. It will be your greatest rebellion." Lyanna did not feel rebellious. She felt trapped. But perhaps that was the same thing. Perhaps rebellion was simply the choice to maintain your humanity when the world demanded you surrender it. The ball was already underway when she descended the stairs. Music floated up from the grand ballroom, a waltz that sounded more like a funeral march to her ears. Chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors. Guests in their finest clothes moved through carefully choreographed social rituals, each interaction weighted with unspoken calculations. Her father waited at the bottom of the stairs, looking uncomfortable in formal wear that fit too tightly around his middle. Lord Thorne had once been handsome, commanding. Now he simply looked diminished, a man who had gambled away more than money. He offered his arm without meeting her eyes. She took it without speaking. They had said everything that needed saying 3 weeks ago, when she had confronted him with the ledgers. "I am saving this family," he had insisted. "You do not understand the position we are in." "You are selling me," she had replied, to a man who engineered this entire situation. He had not denied it. That was perhaps the worst part. He had simply looked at her with tired eyes and said, "We all make sacrifices for family, Lyanna. This is yours." The ballroom doors opened. Faces turned toward them, assessing, judging, calculating her worth. Lyanna lifted her chin and let her face settle into a practiced smile. If this was to be her execution, she would face it with dignity. Victor Grayson waited near the center of the room, and the sight of him made Lyanna's skin crawl. He was perhaps 50, gray-eyed and cold, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He watched her approach like a man examining a particularly interesting specimen, and there was possession in his gaze that made her want to run. "My dear Lyanna," he said, taking her hand without asking permission. His fingers were cold, his grip just slightly too tight. "You look exquisite tonight." "Thank you," she managed, the words scraping her throat raw. He drew her closer, inhaling near her neck in a gesture that was far too intimate for a public setting. "Your mother had a particular scent," he murmured. "Wild things and moonlight. You carry it too." Lyanna's breath caught. "I beg your pardon?" Victor's smile widened. "Your mother was Silvermoon clan, was she not? One of the werewolf families. Eleanor Silvermoon, who ran away to marry a human. Did she tell you before she died?" "No?" He made a soft, disappointed sound. "What a pity. To die without passing on your heritage. But I suppose she had her reasons." The world tilted. Werewolf. The word did not make sense, could not make sense, except that it explained everything. Her mother's unusual connection with animals, the way she always seemed to know what Lyanna was feeling, the gift she had spoken of with her dying breath. "How do you know this?" Lyanna whispered. Victor's cold fingers traced along her jaw. "I make it my business to know valuable things, my dear, and you are quite valuable. Half werewolf, able to pass as fully human. There are collectors who would pay extraordinary sums for someone like you." The words penetrated slowly, their meaning crystallizing into horror. Not a husband, not even a creditor collecting a debt, a trafficker, a merchant of flesh. "Your breeding hips will produce strong sons," Victor continued, his voice clinically detached. "Your bloodline is unique. The Silvermoon clan has not mixed with human stock in 3 generations. The genetic potential alone is worth more than your father's debts 10 times over." Lyanna pulled back, or tried to, but his grip tightened. People were watching, smiling, assuming this was simply an engaged couple having an intimate moment. No one saw the trap closing. No one saw her drowning. "I need some air," she said, desperation making her voice shake. "Soon," Victor promised. "After the announcement, after everyone knows you belong to me." She could not breathe. The ballroom was too hot, too crowded, too full of faces. That would not help even if she screamed. Her father would not intervene. Celeste would not care. She was alone in a room full of people, and no one would save her. So she saved herself. The moment Victor's attention shifted to accept congratulations from a passing noble, Lyanna moved. She slipped through the crowd like water, practiced at making herself invisible, at moving through spaces without being noticed. It was a skill she had honed over 5 years of being overlooked. She pushed through a side door and into the garden courtyard beyond. The night air hit her face like a blessing. She gasped, drawing deep breaths of freedom, her chest tight with panic barely contained. The garden was lit by lanterns strung between ancient oak trees, their golden light painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. Lyanna walked deeper into the maze of hedges and flowering bushes, away from the music and laughter, away from the future that waited to devour her. Her heels clicked against stone pathways until she found a secluded alcove near a fountain. The sound of running water almost drowned out the noise from the ballroom. Here, finally, she could breathe. She sank onto a marble bench and let her head fall into her hands. Tears threatened, but she refused them. Crying would not change anything. It never had. Footsteps approached. Heavy, measured, purposeful. Not the hesitant shuffle of a drunk guest, but the confident stride of someone who owned whatever ground they walked upon. Lyanna looked up, hastily wiping at her eyes, and froze. A man stood at the entrance to the alcove, his tall frame backlit by lantern light. He was dressed in dark clothes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and even from this distance she sensed something otherworldly about him. Something not quite human. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge. His presence was a physical force, and every instinct she possessed screamed both danger and sanctuary in equal measure. "I did not mean to intrude." His voice was deep, textured like smoke and whiskey. "I thought this area was empty." She should have apologized and left. That was what a proper young lady would do. Instead, she found herself speaking honestly for the first time all evening. "I am hiding." A pause. Then unexpectedly, a low sound that might have been amusement. "From everything?" The word escaped before she could stop it, carrying more truth than she had intended to share with a stranger. Everything. He moved closer, and the lantern light finally caught his features. Lyanna's breath stopped in her throat. He was beautiful in the way that storms were beautiful, all raw power and barely contained danger. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, eyes that gleamed like molten silver in the darkness. His dark hair was slightly too long, falling across his forehead in a way that suggested he cared nothing for fashion. There was something feral about him, something that made her instincts scream both run and stay. "Everything is a lot to hide from," he said, settling onto the opposite end of the bench without asking permission. "Tell me." And somehow impossibly she did. "I am being sold." The words tumbled out like water through a broken dam. "My father arranged a marriage to settle his debts. The man is cruel and looks at me like I am livestock. He knows things about my mother, about what I am, and he wants to breed me like some kind of prize animal. The announcement happens tonight, and after that, there is no escape." Why was she telling him this? She did not even know his name. But something about the darkness and the distance from the ballroom made her brave, or perhaps just reckless. "So do not let it happen." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if defying arranged marriages was as simple as choosing what to wear in the morning. Lyanna laughed, a bitter sound. "You do not understand how this works. I have no power, no money, no family who actually cares what I want. When Victor Grayson comes to claim me, I will smile and nod and let myself be led to slaughter, because that is what good daughters do." "Is that what you believe?" The stranger's silver eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "That you have no power?" "I know I do not." "Then you are wrong." He leaned forward slightly, and she caught his scent. Pine and night air, and something wild she could not name. Power is not always about money or title or physical strength. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to play by their rules. Easy to say when you are not the one being bartered like cattle. He smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of lips that made something low in her stomach tighten. "You would be surprised what I understand about being used as a bargaining chip." Before she could respond, voices echoed from the garden path. Celeste's shrill tone cut through the night. "She must be out here somewhere. Victor has arrived and she needs to be presented properly." Panic flooded through Lyanna, cold and sharp. They were coming. Her time had run out. She stood abruptly, her heart hammering against her ribs. The stranger rose with her, watching her face with those unsettling silver eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense she had ever built. "Please," she whispered, though she was not sure what she was asking for. "Help, understanding, a miracle." The footsteps grew closer. Celeste's voice called her name, each syllable dripping with false sweetness and real threat. In that moment, Lyanna made a choice born of pure desperation, and her mother's long-ago words about rebellion. She closed the distance between herself and the stranger in 3 quick steps and threw her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. His body went rigid with surprise, every muscle tensing beneath her touch. He was solid and warm and real, and for a heartbeat she felt safer than she had in months. "I am so sorry," she breathed against his shirt, "but I need you to be someone. Anyone. Just for a moment. Please." His hands hovered uncertainly at her sides before slowly, carefully settling on her waist. The touch sent electricity racing across her skin, a sensation unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was as if every nerve ending had suddenly come alive, hyper-aware of exactly where his fingers rested, the warmth of his palms through the thin silk of her gown. "What is your name?" he murmured, his voice closer now, his breath stirring her hair. "Lyanna," she whispered back. "My mother called me Lyanna." "Lyanna." He repeated it, testing the sound on his tongue like a secret. "I am Theron." "There you are." Celeste's voice shattered the moment like breaking glass. Lyanna pulled back slightly but did not let go, keeping one hand fisted in Theron's shirt as she turned to face her stepmother. Celeste stood at the alcove entrance, her expression cycling rapidly through surprise, calculation, and barely concealed fury. Behind her, 3 figures emerged from the shadows. Her father, looking uncomfortable in his formal wear. Victor Grayson, his gray eyes narrowing dangerously as he assessed the scene. And a woman Lyanna did not recognize, dressed in elegant black, her face sharp and assessing. "What is the meaning of this?" Her father's voice boomed across the space, though she heard the nervousness underneath. He was always nervous around powerful people, always afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. Theron's arm tightened almost imperceptibly around Lyanna's waist, protective, possessive, claiming. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that made even her father take an involuntary step backward. "The meaning should be obvious." Victor stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "This girl is promised to me. The contracts are signed, the arrangements made. I do not know who you are, stranger, but you are interfering in matters that do not concern you." The woman in black suddenly inhaled sharply, her eyes widening as she looked at Theron. She dropped into a deep curtsy, her voice trembling. "Your Majesty." The garden went silent. Her father's face drained of color. Celeste looked like she might faint. Even Victor seemed frozen, confusion and dawning horror fighting for dominance on his features. Lyanna looked up into the man holding her. "No, not a stranger anymore. Not Theron. Your Majesty." The man she had grabbed in desperation, the one she had confessed her fears to, the one currently holding her like she belonged to him. His silver eyes met hers, and she saw something flicker in their depths. Amusement, resignation, warning. "Yes," he said softly, though his words carried to every corner of the garden. "I suppose introductions are in order." He straightened to his full height, and somehow he seemed larger, more imposing, as if acknowledging his title had physically transformed him. The easy manner he had shown in their conversation was replaced by something harder, more dangerous. "I am Theron Blackwood," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Alpha King of the Northern Dominion and Sovereign of the Lunar Court." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of shock through everyone present. Lyanna felt her legs threaten to give out. Only the steady presence of his hand at her waist kept her upright, anchored to reality when everything else felt like a fever dream. Alpha King. She had heard stories, whispered tales told in hushed tones about a ruler who commanded not just armies, but entire packs of creatures that walked the line between human and beast. Werewolves were supposed to be myths, legends to frighten children. Yet here he stood, solid and real and impossibly powerful, with her tucked against his side like she had any right to be there. "Your Majesty!" Her father found his voice first, though it came out strangled and weak. "We had no idea you were attending this evening. If we had known, preparations would have been made. Proper protocols." "I do not require protocols." Theron cut him off smoothly. "I came seeking privacy, not ceremony. Instead, I found something far more interesting." His fingers flexed slightly against her waist, a subtle reminder of their positioning that sent heat flooding through her cheeks. She knew she should step away, put proper distance between them, but her body refused to cooperate. Some instinct deeper than logic told her that letting go would be a mistake. Victor had finally recovered enough to speak, though fury made his voice shake. "This is unacceptable. A contract exists between myself and this girl's family. Legal documents have been signed and witnessed. You cannot simply—" "Cannot?" The single word dropped into the space between them like a blade, sharp and dangerous. Theron's expression did not change, but something in the air shifted, a crackling tension that made the hair on Lyanna's arm stand up. "Perhaps you have forgotten who you are addressing." The woman in black, still in her curtsy, spoke quickly. "Lord Grayson, I strongly advise—" "I do not need advice from you," Victor snapped, though his eyes never left Theron. "I have legal rights here. The girl's father owes me substantial debts, and this marriage is the agreed-upon settlement. No one, not even a king, can simply—" He did not finish. Theron moved so fast, Lyanna barely tracked it. One moment standing beside her, the next he had Victor pinned against the garden wall, his hand around the man's throat, his eyes blazing with that inhuman silver light. "I do not make idle threats," Theron growled, and his voice had changed, deepened, carried harmonics that made every instinct in Lyanna's body scream danger. "You have 5 seconds to order your men to stand down, or I demonstrate exactly why my people call me king." "Drop your weapons," Victor choked out, his face purpling. "All of you, drop them now." The men who had accompanied him hesitated, but the fear in their leader's voice was unmistakable. One by one, they lowered their weapons. Theron released Victor, who collapsed to the ground, gasping. The Alpha King turned to Lyanna's father, his expression carved from ice. "Lord Thorne, you will present yourself at Shadow Peak Palace tomorrow at noon. We will discuss terms then." "The palace?" Her father's voice cracked on the words. "Your Majesty, surely—" "Unless you would prefer to continue these negotiations with Lord Grayson and his questionable contracts." The implied threat hung in the air like morning frost. "No, Your Majesty." Her father scrambled to his feet, bowing so deeply she thought he might topple over. "We will be there. Noon. Precisely." "Excellent." Theron's tone suggested the matter was settled. Then unexpectedly he looked down at Lyanna. "Walk with me." It was not really a question, but the way he asked it, soft enough that only she could hear, with the faintest note of uncertainty, made it feel like a choice rather than a command. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They moved through the garden together, his hand shifting from her waist to the small of her back, guiding but not pushing. The crowd that had gathered melted away before them like snow under spring sun. She caught glimpses of shocked faces, heard the whispered rush of gossip spreading like wildfire, but none of it seemed real. "You are shaking," Theron observed quietly once they were away from the immediate crowd. "I just embraced the Alpha King," Lyanna whispered back, the reality of it finally sinking in. "I grabbed you like you were just some convenient stranger. You were not wrong." There was amusement in his voice now, warm and unexpected. "But you are the king. Even kings can be strangers." They reached a more secluded part of the garden where the path opened into a small clearing surrounded by night-blooming roses. Their scent was heavy and sweet, almost intoxicating. He turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight his features seemed sharper, more otherworldly. "You were brave back there," he said. "I was desperate," Lyanna corrected, wrapping her arms around herself now that his touch had withdrawn. The night air suddenly felt cold. Bravery and desperation often look the same from the outside. His silver eyes studied her with unnerving intensity. "You could have played it safe, smiled, and accepted your fate. Most people do." "My mother taught me that compassion is rebellion," Lyanna said softly, thinking of the locket still warm against her throat beneath the borrowed necklace. But I do not think she meant grabbing random men in gardens. That earned her a genuine smile, brief but transforming. For just a moment he looked younger, less burdened. "No, I imagine that was not part of the lesson plan." The woman in black appeared at the edge of the clearing, her posture urgent. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but there is a situation that requires your immediate attention." Something dark flashed across Theron's face. Frustration, anger, resignation. "Of course there is." He turned back to Lyanna, and she saw the king settling over him like armor, replacing the man she had glimpsed moments before. "Tomorrow at noon, come prepared to make a choice. Your choice, not your father's." "What kind of choice?" "One that will change everything," he said, "if you are brave enough to take it." Then he was moving away, and Lyanna was alone in the garden with the scent of roses and the lingering warmth of where his hand had touched hers. She stood there for a long moment, trying to process everything that had happened. An hour ago, she had been resigned to her fate, ready to be sold to a cruel man to pay her father's debts. Now she had the Alpha King's attention and an invitation to the palace that felt like both salvation and danger. When she finally made her way back toward the ballroom, the party had devolved into chaos. Her father stood with Celeste, both of them looking pale and shaken. Victor had disappeared entirely. Guests clustered in groups, whispering furiously, their eyes following her with a mixture of shock and calculation. The moment her father spotted her, his expression transformed from worry to fury. "What have you done?" he hissed, grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise. "Do you have any idea what you have just caused?" Before Lyanna could respond, a clear voice cut through the tension. "I would not do that if I were you." A young woman with copper-colored hair and sharp green eyes stood nearby, her stance protective despite her small frame. Lyanna recognized her vaguely as someone from the province's minor nobility, though she could not remember the name. "This is family business," her father growled. "And that bruise you are creating on her arm is assault," the woman countered coolly, "in front of at least 40 witnesses. I wonder how the Alpha King would view such treatment of someone who has his attention." Her father released Lyanna like she had burned him. The young woman smiled, though it held no warmth. "Wise choice. Come, dear, let us get you somewhere more comfortable." She offered her arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Lyanna took it. As they walked away from her father's stunned silence, the woman leaned in close. "That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I have seen in years, possibly both. Either way, you have made tonight infinitely more interesting." "I did not mean to," Lyanna said honestly. "Oh, no one ever means to catch the Alpha King's attention." The woman laughed, a bright sound that seemed out of place in the heavy atmosphere. "But you did. And now, my dear, everything changes. The question is, are you ready for it?" Lyanna thought of her mother's locket, of Theron's silver eyes, of the choice she had made in desperation that had somehow altered the course of her entire life. "I do not know," she answered honestly. "Good," the woman said, her smile turning genuine. "Uncertainty means you are still thinking clearly. Come to the palace tomorrow with your head high and your wits sharp. You are going to need both." The night stretched ahead, full of whispered conversations and shocked reactions and the weight of decisions not yet made. But for the first time in 5 years, Lyanna felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. Or perhaps it was simply fear in a different shape. Time would tell which. The journey to Shadow Peak Palace took 3 hours by carriage through winding roads that climbed steadily upward, away from the cultivated gardens of human settlements and into the wild woodland beyond. Lyanna sat across from her father and Celeste, watching the landscape transform outside the window. The trees here grew taller, their branches interlacing overhead to create a canopy that filtered sunlight into shifting patterns of gold and shadow. This was werewolf territory. She could feel it in the air itself, something primal and untamed that made her pulse quicken. Theron's invitation had been clear, noon at the palace, but he had not specified who should attend, and her father had insisted on accompanying her, Celeste in tow like a predator scenting blood. "We will negotiate favorable terms," her father muttered, more to himself than to her. "The debts can be restructured. Perhaps a position at court for you, something respectable." "She is not negotiating anything," Celeste said sharply. "The Alpha King will make his offer, and we will accept it gratefully." Neither of them looked at Lyanna. Neither asked what she wanted. The palace emerged from the forest like a secret gradually revealed. It was not the gleaming white marble structure she had imagined from stories. Instead, it was built from dark stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, with towers that stretched toward the sky like reaching fingers. Ivy climbed the walls in deliberate patterns, and everywhere she looked she saw the integration of nature and architecture, as if the building had grown from the earth rather than being imposed upon it. Guards in dark uniforms flanked the main entrance, their expressions neutral, but their postures radiating controlled power. As the carriage pulled to a stop, one of them opened the door with mechanical efficiency. "Lord Thorne and family," her father announced, his voice pitched too loud in an attempt to sound confident. "We have an appointment with His Majesty." "You are expected." The guard's gaze swept over them before settling briefly on Lyanna. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or curiosity, but it vanished before she could interpret it. A woman in elegant black appeared, the same one from the garden. Her sharp features were arranged in a professional smile. "Welcome to Shadow Peak Palace. I am Beatrice, His Majesty's senior advisor. If you will follow me, please." They walked through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, paintings of stern-faced rulers whose eyes seemed to follow their movement. Servants moved silently through the halls, and twice Lyanna caught glimpses of people whose grace and bearing suggested they were something more than human. Beatrice led them to a sitting room decorated in deep greens and golds, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a courtyard garden. "Please wait here. His Majesty will join you shortly." The moment they were alone, Celeste rounded on Lyanna. "Remember, you will be gracious, demure, and above all compliant. Do not speak unless spoken to directly." "What if I have something to say?" Lyanna asked quietly. "Then you will keep it to yourself." Celeste's eyes were hard. "Your foolish actions last night may have bought us this opportunity, but it is up to you not to waste it." Before Lyanna could respond, the door opened. Theron entered, and the room seemed to shrink around his presence. He was dressed formally today, dark jacket with subtle silver threading, but there was something in his bearing that made the clothes seem almost irrelevant. He carried authority like other men carried weapons. Behind him came 2 others. A man with grizzled features and an eye patch that revealed scar tissue where his left eye should be, and a woman with muscular build and the watchful stance of a trained fighter. "Lord Thorne," Theron said, his voice carrying cool politeness, "allow me to introduce my advisors. Marcus, who oversees intelligence and foreign relations, and Kira, who commands the palace guard." The introductions felt like a formality, a polite fiction before harder truths emerged. "Please, sit." Theron indicated the chairs arranged around a low table. It was not a suggestion. They sat. Lyanna took the chair farthest from her father, acutely aware of how the power dynamics had shifted. In their house, he was the authority. Here he was a supplicant, and a poorly positioned one at that. Theron remained standing, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. "Let us address the situation plainly. Lord Thorne, you owe Victor Grayson approximately 15,000 gold marks in gambling debts and unpaid loans. Is that accurate?" Her father swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Majesty. And in lieu of payment, you arranged to marry your daughter to him, despite the fact that she clearly found the match distasteful. It was a reasonable solution." "I am not finished." The words were soft, but her father's mouth snapped shut. "These arrangements were made without proper oversight, which makes them legally questionable. More importantly, Victor Grayson operates several lending businesses that exist in violation of Crown law." Marcus stepped forward, producing a leather folder. "We have already begun auditing his accounts, Your Majesty. What we have found suggests tax evasion, illegal interest rates, and several counts of fraud. Lord Grayson is in no position to demand anything from anyone at the moment." Relief flooded her father's face. "Then the debts are void?" "No." Theron's tone turned cold. "Your debts are real regardless of Grayson's criminal activities, but the payment method will change. The Crown will assume your obligations in exchange for certain considerations." Here it came. The price, the new cage with prettier bars. "What kind of considerations?" Celeste asked, her voice carefully neutral. Theron's gaze shifted to Lyanna, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "That depends on what Lyanna wants." The room went silent. Even the sound of breathing seemed suspended. "I am sorry," Lyanna managed, certain she had misheard. "What do you want?" he repeated, enunciating each word clearly. "Not your father, not your stepmother. You. Because while I am willing to settle these debts, I will not do it by simply transferring you from one unwanted situation to another." It was the question no one had ever asked her. Not in all the months of planning her marriage to Victor. Not in all the years since her mother's death when she had been slowly erased from her own life. What did she want? The answer surprised her with its clarity. "I want to be free. Not someone's debt payment or political advantage or disappointing daughter. Just free to choose my own path." "Even if that path is difficult?" Theron asked. "Even if it means leaving behind everything you know?" "Everything I know is a cage," Lyanna said, feeling her mother's locket warm against her skin beneath the borrowed necklace. "I would rather face difficulty with dignity than comfort without choice." Kira made an approving sound. Marcus's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his remaining eye, reassessing her. Theron smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Then I have a proposition for you, but I think we should discuss it privately. Your father and stepmother can wait outside." "Your Majesty," her father protested, "surely it is not appropriate." "I am not asking permission," Theron said smoothly. "I am informing you of what is going to happen." Marcus was already opening the door, his smile polite but implacable. "There is a lovely waiting area just down the hall. I am sure you will be quite comfortable." They had no choice but to leave. Her father shot Lyanna a warning look as he departed, but she ignored it, keeping her attention on Theron as the door closed behind them. The silence that followed felt charged with possibility. "You meant what you said," Theron observed, studying her, "about wanting freedom." "Every word." "Good. Because what I'm about to offer will require you to be very brave, very adaptable, and potentially very patient." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "The werewolf territories have been isolated for too long. My people are powerful, but we lack certain connections to the human world, diplomatic bridges that could benefit both species. More than that, children are being trafficked, werewolf and human both. I need someone who can navigate human settlements without raising alarm." "You want a spy?" Lyanna said. "I want someone who understands what it means to be underestimated," Theron corrected. "Someone who knows how to survive in hostile territory without losing their compassion. Someone who chose kindness even when the world gave them every reason not to." He remembered their conversation in the garden, her mother's words, everything she had confessed in what she had thought was anonymous darkness. "What exactly are you proposing?" Kira cleared her throat. "What His Majesty is trying very hard not to say directly is that he needs a human liaison who can work between our court and yours. Someone who can advocate for better understanding between species. It is a position we have never filled before. And in exchange for this position, you would settle my father's debts." "I would settle the debts regardless," Theron said. "Consider that handled as of this morning. What I am offering you is a choice. Return to your old life, free of Victor, but still tied to your father's household. Or accept a position here at the palace, with housing, salary, and independence." It sounded too good to be true, which meant there had to be a catch. "What are you not telling me?" Theron's smile turned rueful. "You would be living in a palace full of werewolves who have varying opinions about humans, Some of my court believe we should have nothing to do with your species. Others think humans are weak and not worth consideration. You would face prejudice, suspicion, and possibly hostility. So similar to my life now, Lyanna said dryly, but with better accommodations and people who are honest about their disdain. Kira laughed outright. I like her. There is one more thing. Theron's expression turned serious. Last night when you touched me, the way I reacted, the protectiveness you felt from me, that was not political strategy. Werewolves have instincts that do not always align with human social norms. There is something called a mate bond. It is recognition on an instinctual level, rare, powerful, and completely inconvenient when it happens with someone you have just met. He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting the careful styling. I am not saying that is what happened, but I am saying I felt something I have never felt before, and I need you to be aware of it before you make any decisions. You are not obligated to anything, but you deserve to know the truth. The room seemed to hold its breath. Marcus, standing by the door, made a soft sound that might have been amusement or sympathy. Lyanna thought about everything he was offering: freedom, purpose, danger, possibility. She thought about her mother's words about choosing compassion as rebellion. She thought about the way Theron's presence had made her feel brave enough to grab hold of change rather than accept defeat. I accept, she said. The position, the complications, all of it. Theron's expression shifted through surprise, relief, and something warmer she could not quite name. Just like that? Just like that. Lyanna met his silver gaze steadily. You asked what I wanted. I want to be someone who matters, who makes a difference, who is not defined by other people's debts or expectations. If that means facing hostile werewolves and navigating inconvenient instincts, well, it still sounds better than marrying Victor Grayson. Welcome to Shadow Peak, Marcus said with something approaching warmth. Your life just got significantly more interesting. Through the window, she could see the forest stretching endlessly toward the horizon, wild and dark and full of unknowable things. Somewhere in that wilderness, she would have to find her place, build her purpose, prove her worth. The old Lyanna would have been terrified. The new one, the one who had grabbed an alpha king in desperation and somehow found salvation, was ready. That evening, as the sun set over Shadow Peak Palace, Theron found Lyanna in the armory. She stood before a wall of weapons, her hand hovering over a silver dagger as if afraid to touch it. That one will kill werewolves, he said quietly from the doorway. She turned, and in the fading light her eyes held both determination and uncertainty. I know, Beatrice told me. Silver is poison to your kind. Theron crossed the room and took the dagger from its mounting. He held it out to her, hilt first. Take it. Lyanna's eyes widened. Why would you? Because if you are going to work with us, you need to be able to protect yourself, even from us. He pressed the weapon into her hand, closing her fingers around the grip. This is Wolf Killer. If I ever lose control, if the beast inside me ever becomes more than the man, I need to know someone I trust can end it. I would not. Lyanna started to protest, but he cut her off gently. Promise me, an oath. If I become the monster humans fear, you will stop me. She looked at the dagger, then at him, understanding the weight of what he was asking. This was not just about protection. It was about trust, about giving her power over him when she had spent her whole life powerless. If you become the monster, she said slowly, her voice steady, I will end you. I swear it on my mother's name. Good, Theron said, and something in his chest loosened. Now I can trust you completely. They stood there as darkness fell, the silver dagger between them, and Lyanna understood that this was the real beginning. Not the desperate embrace in the garden, not the dramatic revelation or the political negotiations. This, the moment when she chose to hold a weapon that could kill him, and he chose to trust her with it. Outside, in the shadows where they could not see, two figures watched through the window. Victor Grayson and a copper-haired werewolf named Garrett, unlikely allies bound by shared hatred of change. The human will not survive training, Garrett said quietly. Make sure of it. Victor smiled, cold and calculating. Oh, I will do better than that. I will make her wish she had accepted my offer when she had the chance. They disappeared into the night, leaving behind only the certainty that the real battle was just beginning. The first week at Shadow Peak Palace taught Lyanna that survival had many faces. Some were obvious, like learning to move silently through corridors where werewolf hearing could detect a heartbeat from 3 rooms away. Others were more subtle, like understanding the hierarchy of glances exchanged during morning briefings, or recognizing which servants would help and which would let her starve before offering a scrap of information. Theron had assigned her quarters in the East Wing, a suite of rooms that were simultaneously more luxurious than anywhere she had ever lived and more isolating than any prison. The furniture was beautiful, dark wood and soft fabrics, but the windows looked out onto the forest rather than the courtyard, a deliberate choice that separated her from the main palace activity. Beatrice appeared each morning at dawn with lessons: werewolf customs, territorial politics, the complex web of alliances that kept the Northern Dominion from fracturing into warring packs. The information came in relentless waves, and Lyanna absorbed it all with desperate focus, aware that ignorance here could be fatal. But knowledge was not the same as acceptance. The palace staff made that abundantly clear. Meals arrived late, or cold, or sometimes not at all. When she walked through corridors, conversations stopped. Guards watched her with expressions ranging from suspicion to open contempt. Twice she found her quarters ransacked, nothing stolen but everything disturbed, a message delivered through violation. She did not complain. Complaining would show weakness, and weakness here was blood in the water. On the morning of her 8th day, Kira appeared at her door before dawn. The guard commander wore training leathers and carried a wooden practice sword, her expression carved from stone. "You train now," Kira said without preamble, "every morning 2 hours before breakfast. If you are going to survive here, you need to be able to fight." The training yard was a wide courtyard surrounded by high walls, the ground packed earth marked with the scars of countless sparring matches. A dozen warriors were already there, going through forms with mechanical precision, their movements flowing like water. They stopped when Lyanna entered. Every eye turned toward her, assessing, judging, dismissing. "This is Lyanna," Kira announced to the assembled fighters. "His Majesty has granted her a position as human liaison. She will train with us until she is competent or dead, whichever comes first." A few laughs, sharp and unfriendly. One young werewolf, barely past adolescence, stepped forward with a cocky grin. "How long do you think she lasts? 5 minutes, 10? Kira's expression did not change. "Let us find out. Lyanna, take a practice sword." The weapon felt awkward in her hands, heavier than she expected, the balance all wrong. The young werewolf, whose name she would later learn was Devon, circled her with predatory grace. "First rule," Kira said, "werewolves are faster, stronger, and heal quicker than humans. You cannot win a straight fight, so do not fight straight." Devon lunged. Lyanna barely got her sword up in time, the impact sending shocks up her arms. He pressed the attack, blow after blow, each one controlled but brutal. Within 30 seconds, she was on the ground, the practice blade at her throat. "Dead," Devon said cheerfully. "Want to try again?" She tried again and again and again. By the time Kira called a halt, Lyanna had been killed 17 times. Her body was one massive bruise, and she could barely lift her arms. "Better," Kira said, which might have been encouragement or simple observation. "Same time tomorrow." The other warriors dispersed, their conversations already excluding her. Lyanna remained on the ground, too exhausted to stand, too stubborn to cry. Footsteps approached. She looked up to find Theron standing over her, his expression unreadable. "You could have stopped her," Lyanna said, her voice raw. "Told Kira to go easier on me." "I could have," Theron agreed. He extended a hand, pulling her to her feet with careful strength. "But that would not help you. They are testing you. If I intervene, it proves you cannot handle yourself." "I cannot handle myself," Lyanna said bitterly. "I died 17 times in an hour. 18, actually." Theron's lips quirked. "I was watching from the beginning. But you got up 17 times. That matters more." He produced a small vial from his pocket, dark glass filled with silver liquid. "Healing salve. Werewolf medicine, but it works on humans too. Use it sparingly. The ingredients are expensive." Their fingers brushed as she took the vial, and that electric sensation sparked again, the one that made her skin hyper-aware of his proximity. The mate bond, she was learning, was not something that faded with familiarity. If anything, it grew stronger the more time they spent together. Theron felt it too. She saw it in the way his pupils dilated, the slight catch in his breath, but he stepped back, maintaining the professional distance he had promised. "There is a council meeting this afternoon," he said. "You should attend. Start learning how decisions are made here." The council chamber was exactly as intimidating as she had feared. The circular table, the stern-faced counselors, the weight of history pressing down from portraits of dead kings. She took her seat between Kira and Marcus, acutely aware of Garrett's hostile stare from across the table. Theron opened the session with routine business: trade agreements, border patrols, mundane governance. Lyanna listened carefully, noting who spoke and who remained silent, who deferred to whom. Then Marcus raised a new item. "We have a situation in the Western Territories. 3 more disappearances this week, all young werewolves from farming families. The pattern matches the trafficking ring we discussed." "How do we know it is not simply runaways?" Garrett challenged. "Young wolves leave their packs all the time." "Because one of them was 9 years old," Marcus said flatly. "Children do not run away alone. They are taken." The room fell silent. Even Garrett had no response to that. "We need intelligence," Theron said. "Someone who can investigate without alerting the traffickers. Suggestions?" "Send a scouting team," one counselor offered. "Small, fast, stealthy." "They will smell werewolves coming from a mile away," Kira countered. "These traffickers use silver weapons. They know our vulnerabilities." "Then we need someone who is not a werewolf," Garrett said, his gaze sliding to Lyanna with poisonous intent. "Perhaps our new human liaison would like to prove her value." The trap was obvious: refuse, and she confirmed she was useless. Accept, and she walked into danger she was completely unprepared for. Either way, Garrett won. Lyanna met his stare. "I will do it. What do you need me to find out?" Theron's expression darkened. "That was not a serious suggestion. You have been here barely a week." "But it is a good idea," Lyanna said, surprised to find she meant it. "I can move through human settlements without raising alarm. Ask questions. Observe. If I find anything concrete, I report back, and your warriors can act on solid intelligence rather than assumptions." "You have no training," Theron said, "no combat experience, no—" "I have nothing to lose," Lyanna interrupted gently, "and apparently something to prove. Let me try." The debate continued for another 20 minutes, but the outcome was never really in question. They needed human intelligence, and she was the only human in the room. 3 days later, Lyanna found herself in the passenger seat of a wagon driven by Marcus, heading toward the border settlements where children were disappearing. "You do not have to do this," Marcus said as they traveled. "His Majesty would understand if you changed your mind." "Would Garrett understand?" Lyanna asked. "Would the others who think I am a useless ornament?" Marcus smiled, a rare expression on his scarred face. "You are braver than you look, girl. Or more foolish. Time will tell which." They reached the town of Millbrook by mid-afternoon, a collection of weather-worn buildings clustered around a central market square. Marcus stayed with the wagon while Lyanna wandered the market, listening to conversations, watching interactions. It did not take long to notice the fear. It hung over the town like smoke, visible in the way mothers kept children close, how men carried weapons openly, the suspicious glances cast at strangers. Something had this community on edge. She struck up a conversation with a baker, complimenting his bread, asking gentle questions about business and trade. He warmed to her slowly, and eventually the truth spilled out. 3 children gone in 2 months, he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one overheard. "The magistrate says they ran off, but we know better. Someone is taking them." "Do you know who?" Lyanna asked. The baker's face closed down. "We do not talk about it. Not safe." Before she could press further, a young girl ran past, maybe 13, her face flushed with fear. She ducked into an alley, and moments later 2 men followed, their movements purposeful, predatory. Lyanna's instinct screamed. She followed. The alley was narrow, dim, the kind of place bad things happened unseen. The girl was pressed against a wall, the 2 men blocking her escape. "Come on now," one said, his voice falsely friendly. "Your ma sent us to fetch you home." The girl shook her head frantically. "My ma is dead. I do not know you." Lyanna stepped into the alley. "Excuse me, I think the girl would like you to leave her alone." Both men turned. They were large, rough-featured, with the kind of casual violence that came from never facing consequences. "This is not your business," the first man said. "Walk away." Lyanna's heart hammered, but she held her ground. "Make me." It was perhaps the stupidest thing she had ever said. The man moved faster than she expected, his hand closing on her arm with bruising force. She tried to pull away, and he backhanded her casually, the blow sending her sprawling. Stars exploded across her vision. Blood filled her mouth. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard the girl scream, heard running footsteps. Then Marcus was there, his presence filling the alley like a storm. He did not speak, did not threaten, simply positioned himself between Lyanna and the men with the absolute certainty of violence about to be unleashed. The men ran. Marcus pulled Lyanna to her feet with surprising gentleness. "Brave," he observed. "Stupid, but brave. Can you walk?" She nodded, though her head spun. The girl was gone, disappeared into the maze of alleys. At least she got away. "This time," Marcus said grimly. "But now those men know someone is asking questions. Our investigation just became much more dangerous." They returned to the wagon and headed back toward Shadow Peak. Lyanna's face throbbed where she had been hit, and she knew by morning she would have a spectacular bruise, her first real injury in service to the crown. Somehow it felt like progress. But when they arrived at the palace, Theron was waiting in the courtyard, and his expression promised a different kind of reckoning. Theron's fury was a cold, controlled thing, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he had shouted. He stood in Lyanna's quarters, his arms crossed, his silver eyes burning with banked rage. Marcus gave me his report. Theron's voice was quiet, precise. "You confronted 2 armed men in an alley, alone, unarmed, untrained. I could not just let them take her," Lyanna said, touching her swollen cheek gingerly. "You could have observed and reported back. We could have sent trained warriors to intercept. Instead, you threw yourself into danger, and now those men are alerted that someone is investigating." "I made a mistake," Lyanna admitted. "I am sorry." "Sorry does not unring bells," Theron said. "In war, mistakes cost lives. You are not playing at diplomacy anymore. You are in the field, and the field is unforgiving." "Then teach me not to make mistakes," Lyanna shot back, her own temper rising. "You want me to investigate human settlements, but you have given me no training in reconnaissance, no protocols for dangerous situations, no backup plans. You threw me into the field blind, and now you are angry I stumbled." Theron opened his mouth, closed it, the argument dying unspoken. She was right. He knew she was right. The admission showed in the way his shoulders dropped fractionally, the rage bleeding into something more complex. "You are correct," he said finally. "I pushed you into the field because we needed intelligence, and I did not give you proper preparation. That was my failure, not yours." The apology surprised her. Kings did not apologize often, she suspected, especially not to subordinates. "Starting tomorrow," he continued, "you train with me personally, 2 hours every morning. Combat, surveillance techniques, interrogation methods, everything you need to survive what I'm asking you to do." "Why you?" Lyanna asked. "You have soldiers who could teach me." "Because I cannot send you into danger unprepared and then sleep at night," Theron said bluntly. "The mate bond makes me protective of you whether I want to be or not, so I will make sure you can protect yourself, and maybe that will quiet the wolf screaming at me to lock you in a tower somewhere." The honesty was startling, vulnerable. He turned to leave but paused at the door. "For what it is worth, what you did today was brave. Foolish, but brave. The girl you tried to save, she escaped because of you. That matters." Then he was gone, and Lyanna was alone with her bruised face and the strange warmth his words had kindled in her chest. True to his word, Theron appeared at her door before dawn the next morning. He wore plain training leathers, his hair tied back, and he carried 2 practice daggers. "First lesson," he said, tossing her one of the blades, "how to kill someone twice your size." The training was brutal, technical, utterly unlike Kira's warrior conditioning. Theron taught her dirty fighting, the kind that ignored honor in favor of survival. Eyes, throat, groin, where to cut to disable rather than kill, how to use an opponent's strength against them. "You will never win a fair fight," he told her as she struggled to break his hold for the 10th time. "So make the fight unfair, cheat, lie, survive." "Is that how you fight?" she gasped. "When I have to," Theron said, "but I try not to have to." They trained like that every morning, and slowly, painfully, Lyanna began to understand the geometry of violence. Where to stand, how to move, the split-second timing that meant the difference between living and dying. But the mornings were not just about combat. Theron taught her to read terrain, to spot surveillance, to ask questions that sounded innocent but gathered intelligence. He taught her the art of being underestimated, of using people's assumptions against them. And in the quiet moments between drills, they talked. About his father's death, about her mother's secrets, about the weight of trying to build something better than what came before. The mate bond hummed between them constantly now, a low-frequency awareness of each other's presence, but they maintained careful distance. Professional, appropriate, aching with restraint. 2 weeks into the new training regimen, the assassination attempt came. Lyanna was walking from the training yard to her quarters, alone in the pre-dawn darkness, when she felt it. A shift in the air, the prickle of being watched. She stopped, muscles tensing, hand moving toward the practice dagger she now carried everywhere. The arrow came from the shadows, silent and deadly, aimed straight at her heart. She moved on pure instinct, throwing herself sideways. The arrow missed her chest, but grazed her shoulder, tearing through cloth and skin. Pain exploded across her senses. 2 more arrows followed. She ran, dodging between pillars, her shoulder screaming. Behind her she heard footsteps, pursuit closing in. Then Garrett stepped into her path, a silver blade gleaming in his hand. "Nothing personal," he said almost apologetically, "but you are a threat to everything we have built. Better you die now than destroy us slowly." Lyanna's hand closed on her dagger. All of Theron's training crystallized in that moment. Do not fight fair. Survive. She feinted left, then went right, throwing dirt from a nearby planter directly at Garrett's eyes. He snarled, blade swinging blind. She ducked under his guard and drove her dagger into his thigh, not a killing blow, but enough to cripple. Garrett went down, and palace guards were there suddenly, drawn by the commotion. They pinned him to the ground, silver chains appearing from nowhere. Theron arrived moments later, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Darius was at his side, concern evident in the old warrior's eyes. "She is wounded," Darius said, moving to examine Lyanna's shoulder. "Arrow graze, not deep, but it needs treatment." Theron's attention fixed on Garrett. "You tried to assassinate her, in my palace, under my protection." "Your protection will be the death of us all," Garrett spat. "She is human. She will betray us. Better to end the threat now." "Take him to the cells," Theron ordered. "We will deal with him properly." As guards dragged Garrett away, Theron turned to Lyanna. His hands were gentle as he examined her wound, but she could feel the trembling rage underneath. "You fought well," he said quietly. "Exactly as I taught you." "He wanted me dead," Lyanna said, the reality sinking in. "He was willing to kill me." "And he failed," Theron said, "which means you are stronger than he expected. Remember that." In the days that followed, Garrett's conspiracy unraveled. 3 other counselors were implicated, all isolationists who saw integration as extinction. They were tried and exiled, their faction broken. But the attempt on Lyanna's life had an unexpected consequence. The palace staff who had been hostile began to soften. She had faced assassination and survived, fought back with skill that impressed even werewolf warriors. She had proven she belonged. 3 weeks after her arrival at Shadow Peak, a young man broke through the palace gates. He was 16, maybe 17, covered in blood and road dust, his clothes torn. He collapsed in the courtyard, gasping. "Please," he begged as guards surrounded him. "Please, I need to see the king. They took my sister. They took Mira." Lyanna's head snapped up. Mira! The name Marcus had mentioned, the girl from Millbrook, the one she had tried to save in the alley weeks ago. She was at Theron's side before conscious thought, helping support the boy as they brought him to the war room. His name was Aiden, and his story spilled out in desperate fragments. "We were traveling from Millbrook to visit family in the Western Territories. My sister and I, and our father. Men attacked us on the road, humans with silver weapons. They killed our father and took Mira. I tracked them for 3 days, but lost the trail near Ashbourne Village." Lyanna's blood ran cold. The girl from the alley, the one who had escaped those men, she had not stayed safe. They had found her family and taken her anyway. "How did they know to use silver?" Kira demanded. "How did they know your family was werewolf?" "They knew everything," Aiden said, his voice breaking. "Our route, our schedule, where we would be vulnerable. Someone told them." "A traitor," Marcus said quietly. "Someone is selling information to the traffickers." The room erupted in accusations and denials, but Theron's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Enough. We do not have time for paranoia. Aiden, can you identify where you lost the trail?" "Yes," the boy said. "I can take you there." "Then we move tonight," Theron decided. "Kira, assemble a rescue team. Small, fast, capable. Marcus, I want every piece of intelligence we have on Ashbourne. Darius, you will command the extraction team." The old captain nodded, his face grim. "Understood, Your Majesty." "And Lyanna," Theron paused, his expression conflicted. "I am coming," she said before he could speak. "You taught me surveillance techniques for exactly this situation. I can move through the village, ask questions, while your warriors stay hidden." "It is too dangerous," Theron said. "Then I will be very careful," Lyanna replied. But that girl is in a cage somewhere, because those men came back for her. I failed to keep her safe in Millbrook. I am not failing her again." Something in her tone must have convinced him, because he nodded slowly. "Fine. But you stay with Marcus and Darius at all times. No heroics." The rescue team assembled as darkness fell. 15 warriors in total, all veterans, all lethal. Theron, Marcus, Kira, Darius, and Lyanna made 20. They moved through the forest in absolute silence, covering the distance to Ashbourne in half the time it would take human travelers. As they approached the village, Theron called a halt. The settlement spread below them, peaceful and ordinary in the moonlight. Somewhere down there, children were imprisoned. "Marcus, Darius, take Lyanna and do reconnaissance," Theron ordered. "Kira, position your team around the perimeter. No one leaves this village until we have those children. Aiden, you stay here with the reserves." "But she is my sister," Aiden protested. "Which is why you stay," Theron said gently. "When we bring her out, she will need to see a familiar face. Can you do that for her?" Aiden nodded reluctantly, tears streaming down his young face. Lyanna descended into Ashbourne with Marcus, Darius, and a guard named Kael, all 4 dressed as ordinary travelers. They went first to the village inn, a tired building with suspicious eyes watching from every shadow. The innkeeper was a large woman with flour-dusted hands and a calculating stare. She looked them over carefully before speaking. "We do not get many travelers this time of year. What brings you to Ashbourne?" "Lost our way," Marcus said with an easy smile. "Thought we were heading for Millbrook, but clearly took a wrong turn." "Millbrook is 2 days north," the innkeeper said. "You are very lost." Lyanna let the men handle the conversation, focusing instead on observing. The inn was too quiet. No other patrons, despite it being early evening. The woman's hands trembled slightly as she poured them ale. Fear or guilt, Lyanna could not tell which. A young girl burst through the back door, her face flushed with panic. "Ma, they are saying someone is asking questions about—" She froze when she saw the strangers, her eyes going wide. "Emma, get in the back," the innkeeper snapped. "Now!" But as the girl fled, Lyanna caught her expression. Terror, desperation, recognition. This was one of the girls from Millbrook Market, someone who knew things she was too afraid to speak. They drank their ale and left, retreating to where Theron waited in the forest. "That girl knows something," Lyanna said, "and she is terrified." "Can you get her to talk?" Theron asked. "Maybe, but not with all of you lurking nearby. Let me go back tomorrow, pretend to be a traveling merchant, build some trust." The debate continued, but Lyanna knew she had already won. They needed intelligence, and she was their best option for gathering it. The next morning, she returned to Ashbourne alone, carrying a pack of minor goods to sell. She set up in the market square, engaging in friendly commerce with suspicious villagers. It took 3 hours before Emma appeared, hovering at the edge of the crowd. Lyanna waved her over. "Looking for anything in particular?" Emma glanced around nervously. "You asked my ma about trouble yesterday. Why?" "Just curious," Lyanna said casually. "Heard there were bandits on the roads." "Not bandits," Emma whispered. "Something worse. They take people, children. We are all so scared." "Do you know where they take them?" "There is a barn," Emma said, her voice barely audible. "Eastern edge of the village. No one goes near it anymore." Lyanna's pulse quickened. "Why not?" "Because people who asked questions disappear," Emma said, her eyes filling with tears. "My friend Mira, from Millbrook, she escaped them once, but they came back for her family, took her and killed her pa. I am so afraid they will come for me too." "I believe you," Lyanna said quietly, "and I am going to help." She left the village carefully, making sure no one followed, and found Theron waiting where the forest met the road. "There is a barn on the eastern edge," she reported. "That is where they are holding prisoners. And Theron, Mira is the girl from Millbrook, the one I tried to save. They killed her father and took her." Theron's expression turned predatory. "Then tonight we go in." But as they planned the rescue in whispered conference, none of them noticed the figure watching from the village. Captain Darius, his face heavy with guilt and terrible choice, knowing what he was about to do would destroy everything but seeing no other path. The barn stood isolated from the main village, surrounded by open ground that would make approach difficult. Theron studied it from the tree line, marking guard positions, calculating angles of attack. 6 guards visible, Kira reported. "Probably more inside. They are armed with silver weapons and crossbows." "We go in fast," Theron decided. "Kira's team takes the guards. My team secures the prisoners. In and out before they can organize resistance." "Where do you want me?" Lyanna asked. "With the horses," Theron said. "Ready to move the prisoners the moment we extract them." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. This was not negotiable. She was not trained for combat assault, and they both knew it. The attack began at midnight. Kira's warriors moved like ghosts, silver daggers flashing in the darkness. Guards fell before they could raise the alarm. The barn door crashed open, and Theron's team poured inside. Lyanna waited with the horses, her heart hammering, every second an eternity. Then she heard it. Not the sounds of battle, but something worse. An explosion, fire erupting from the barn's roof, screams. Something had gone terribly wrong. Theron's voice roared over the chaos. "It is a trap! Fall back!" But it was too late. From the forest on all sides came armed men, dozens of them, human mercenaries with silver weapons. They had been waiting. Lyanna watched in horror as her allies were surrounded, outnumbered, fighting desperately against enemies who had prepared specifically to kill werewolves. And standing at the edge of the firelight, directing the ambush with anguished eyes, was Captain Darius. Theron saw him at the same moment Lyanna did. The shock on the Alpha King's face was devastating. His oldest friend, the man who had saved his life, leading the enemy. "Darius." Theron's voice was barely a whisper, carrying across the battlefield. "What have you done?" "I am sorry, old friend," Darius called back, his voice breaking. "But they have my family, my wife, my daughters. He gave me a choice: betray you or watch them die. I could not let them suffer." The words hit Theron like physical blows. Around them, the battle raged. Warriors dying, silver burning through flesh, the stench of blood and smoke painting the air. Lyanna could not just hide, could not watch while her allies died. She grabbed a torch and rode straight toward the barn, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Fire! The barn is burning! The prisoners!" The mercenaries hesitated, confused by the crazy human woman charging into battle. That moment of confusion was enough. Theron's warriors used the distraction to break the encirclement, fighting their way toward the barn. They crashed through the burning walls and emerged with children, Mira among them, all alive but traumatized. But the cost was devastating. Marcus stood in the barn doorway, his body riddled with crossbow bolts, his remaining eye fading. "Tell Theron," he gasped as Lyanna reached him. "Was worth it. The children." He died before he could finish. Lyanna had never seen someone die violently before. The stillness of it, the terrible absence where life had been. She knelt in his blood, this gruff man who had taught her so much, and something inside her broke. Theron was there suddenly, pulling her away from the body, his face a mask of barely controlled devastation. "We have to go. Now." The retreat was chaos. They fought their way clear of the village, carrying wounded and children, leaving their dead behind because there was no time. Darius and the mercenaries did not pursue, apparently content with the damage they had inflicted. Kael took a silver bolt to the chest covering the retreat. Kira dragged him to safety, but the wound was catastrophic. 3 other guards fell in the fighting, and when they reached Shadow Peak at dawn, Kira herself collapsed. The silver poisoning she had fought off during battle finally overwhelmed her. Healers worked frantically, extracting the contaminated blood, but the damage was done. She survived, but her left arm was paralyzed, the nerves destroyed beyond repair. The guard commander who had tested Lyanna that first day would never wield a sword again. Theron stood alone on the battlements, staring out at the forest, his shoulders bowed under weight that had just increased immeasurably. 5 warriors dead, Marcus gone, Darius revealed as traitor, Kira crippled. Lyanna found him there as the sun rose fully. She did not speak, just stood beside him, offering silent presence because there were no words adequate for this kind of loss. "I should have seen it," Theron said finally. "Darius was with me for 20 years. He saved my life at the Battle of Northern Ridge. And all that time, Victor had his family. I never knew, never asked." "How could you have known?" Lyanna asked quietly. "Because I am supposed to protect my people," Theron said, his voice hollow. "All of them. Including the families of my warriors. I failed Darius, I failed Marcus, I failed those children who suffered because I was too slow, too blind." His hands gripped the stone parapet hard enough that Lyanna heard it crack. The wolf was close to the surface, barely contained grief transforming into rage. She took a risk, reached out and placed her hand over his. The touch was a spark, the mate bond flaring to life, but this time she did not pull away. "You cannot carry this alone," she said softly. "Let me help." "How?" Theron's voice was raw. "How can you help when I led my men into a trap, when I trusted the wrong person, when children are still in cages because we failed?" "We saved 7 children tonight," Lyanna said. 7 lives that matter. Marcus died making sure they escaped. His sacrifice meant something. Do not dishonor it by giving up now." Theron turned to look at her, and the anguish in his silver eyes was naked, undefended. "You almost died tonight. When I saw you ride into that battle—" "I know," Lyanna said. "I was terrified too, but we are alive, and we have work to do." They stood like that as the sun climbed higher, hands touching, grief and relief, and something deeper flowing between them through the bond. It was not romantic. It was something more fundamental. 2 people who had seen darkness together and chosen to keep standing. The war room meeting that afternoon was tense. They were down to core leadership, the empty seats a pointed reminder of the cost. Marcus's chair sat vacant. Darius's name had been struck from the rolls. Kira attended, but her left arm hung useless at her side, a visible scar of their failure. "We need to assume Victor knows our capabilities now," Theron said. "He will adjust his tactics. We need to do the same." "Attack his financial network," one counselor suggested. "Bleed him economically. Infiltrate his organization," another offered. "Turn his own people against him." Ideas flew, each more desperate than the last. They were reacting instead of planning, driven by grief and anger rather than strategy. Then Lyanna spoke up, her voice quiet but carrying. "He wants me." The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward her. "Victor Grayson wanted to marry me because of my bloodline," Lyanna continued. "Half werewolf, valuable to collectors. He has not given up on that. What if we use it?" "Absolutely not," Theron said immediately. "Hear me out," Lyanna pressed. "We know he has a network of informants and guards. We know he keeps prisoners somewhere secure. What if I let myself be captured? I could gather intelligence from inside, find out where he keeps the main facility, identify his backers." "It is too dangerous," Kira said, her voice rough. "You would be walking into certain captivity." "Better than sending more warriors into traps," Lyanna countered. "Victor wants me alive. He will not kill me immediately. That gives us time to plan a proper extraction." The debate raged for an hour, but Lyanna could feel the tide turning. They needed intelligence desperately, and she was the only one Victor would not immediately kill on sight. Finally, Theron called for a vote. It was not a democracy, but he wanted to know where his council stood. 7 voted in favor, 2 against. Theron did not vote. He looked at Lyanna for a long moment, and she saw the war behind his eyes. King versus man, duty versus mate bond. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we do it properly. Backup plans, extraction teams, embedded signals. You do not stay in his custody longer than necessary." "Agreed," Lyanna said. "And you take this." Theron drew the silver dagger from his belt, the one he had given her weeks ago. "If the worst happens, if we cannot extract you in time, you use this to escape, whatever it takes." "I will survive," Lyanna said, taking the blade. "I promise." But even as she said it, she wondered if it was a promise she could keep. The plan came together over the next 3 days. They would stage a raid on a suspected trafficking site near Millbrook, close enough that Victor's people would hear about it. Lyanna would separate from the group during the fighting and be captured by mercenaries who had standing orders to bring her to Victor alive. Simple, terrible, necessary. The night before the mission, Theron found her in the garden, the same place where they had first met weeks ago. It felt like a lifetime. "You do not have to do this," he said without preamble. "I could order the mission canceled." "You could," Lyanna agreed, "but we both know you will not. Too many children are suffering." "I am sending you into captivity," Theron said, his voice rough, "violating every instinct I have. If something happens to you—" "Then you will tear down his whole operation to get me back," Lyanna finished. "I trust you to do that." Theron stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, see the silver flecks dancing in his eyes. The mate bond hummed between them, stronger than ever, demanding acknowledgement. "When you come back," he said quietly, "we need to talk about this. About us. No more pretending it does not exist." "When I come back," Lyanna promised. "Not if when." He kissed her then, finally, after weeks of restraint. It was not gentle or tentative. It was desperation and promise and goodbye all at once, and Lyanna felt it all the way to her bones. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Theron rested his forehead against hers. "Come back to me," he whispered. "I will," she said, "I swear it." But the next evening, as mercenaries surrounded her in the forest and silver chains locked around her wrists, as she was thrown into a wagon and driven toward an unknown facility while Theron's warriors maintained their cover and did not intervene, Lyanna wondered if she had just made a promise she could not keep. The wagon traveled for hours into deeper forest, away from anything she recognized. When it finally stopped, rough hands dragged her out into a clearing where a building loomed against the night sky. And standing in the doorway, smiling his cold smile, was Victor Grayson. "Welcome, my dear," he said. "I have been expecting you. It took longer than I anticipated, but I knew eventually you would come to me." Behind him, Lyanna glimpsed cages, dozens of them, and in those cages the faces of children stared out with hollow, hopeless eyes. She had found the main facility. She had the intelligence they needed, but now she was trapped inside it, and rescue felt very far away. Victor's guards pulled her inside, and the door closed behind her with the finality of a tomb ceiling. Through the bars of the nearest cage, Mira's frightened eyes met hers. Lyanna touched the silver dagger hidden in her boot, still undetected. She had promised Theron she would survive. Now, she just had to figure out how. The cell was clean. That was the first thing Lyanna noticed, and somehow it made everything worse. A dirty cell would have been honest, a reflection of the evil being done here. But clean white walls and sterile floors suggested something clinical, scientific, as if the horror of trafficking children could be sanitized through presentation. Victor had separated her from the other prisoners immediately. Her cell was larger, better furnished, with an actual bed instead of a cage, special treatment for special merchandise. She sat on that bed now, her wrists raw from the silver chains they had removed once she was secured, and tried to calm the panic threatening to consume her. Theron knew where she was, roughly. The rescue team would be planning extraction. She just had to survive until they arrived. The door opened without warning. Victor entered carrying a tray of food, playing the gracious host. He set it on the small table and smiled. "You must be hungry. The journey was long." Lyanna did not touch the food. "What is this place?" "A research facility," Victor said, settling into the room's only chair. "I have been studying werewolf physiology for 20 years, trying to understand what makes them superior to humans, and more importantly, how to level that playing field." "By torturing children?" Victor's expression hardened. "I prefer the term experimental subjects, and yes, some discomfort is unavoidable in the pursuit of knowledge, but the potential benefits to humanity are immeasurable." He stood and moved to the door, gesturing for her to follow. "Come, let me show you what we have accomplished." Lyanna had no choice but to follow, 2 guards flanking her, silver weapons ready. Victor led her through corridors that resembled a hospital more than a prison. Through windows she glimpsed laboratories with equipment she did not recognize, rooms filled with vials and instruments. Then they reached the observation wing. Cells lined both sides of a long corridor, and in each cell was a prisoner. Some were children she recognized from missing person reports. Others were adults, werewolves in various states of transformation, some stuck between human and wolf in ways that looked agonizing. "Subject 12, Victor said, stopping before one cell. "Werewolf male, age 16. We have been testing the limits of forced transformation. Can a werewolf be made to shift against their will? The answer is yes, through a combination of silver compounds and electrical stimulation. Unfortunately, prolonged exposure damages the brain. He can no longer remember his human form." The boy in the cell stared at nothing, his eyes vacant, drool running down his chin. Lyanna's stomach churned. "You are a monster," she whispered. "I am a scientist," Victor corrected. "And you, my dear, are going to be my greatest success. Half werewolf, half human, able to pass as either. If I can isolate what allows that, I can create soldiers who have werewolf abilities without werewolf vulnerabilities. An army that could protect humanity from the predators who have hunted us for centuries." They reached the end of the corridor, and Victor opened a final door. This room was different. Not cells, but medical bays with restraining tables, surgical equipment, machines that hummed with quiet menace. "Tomorrow we begin your contribution to science," Victor said. "I promise to be as gentle as the research allows." He left her then, the guards returning her to her cell. Lyanna sank onto the bed, shaking. She had known intellectually that Victor was trafficking children, but seeing the broken minds and tortured bodies, knowing that tomorrow she would be strapped to one of those tables. She touched the silver dagger hidden in her boot, the one Theron had given her. They had searched her, but not thoroughly enough, assuming a captive would not have weapons. The blade was small comfort, but it was something. Footsteps approached her cell hours later. Lyanna tensed, expecting guards, but the woman who entered was unexpected. Celeste. Her stepmother looked haggard, her elegant clothes rumpled, her carefully maintained appearance cracked. She carried a tray of food, and her hands trembled as she set it down. "You work for him," Lyanna said, the betrayal fresh and sharp. "I had no choice," Celeste said, her voice breaking. He said he had my daughter. From my first marriage, before I met your father. He showed me proof she was alive, said if I did not cooperate." Lyanna studied her stepmother with new eyes. "She is not real, is she? There is no daughter." Celeste's face crumpled. "I do not know anymore. He showed me letters, photographs, but I have never been allowed to see her. And today I saw this place, saw what he does to children, and I realized, even if she is real, I cannot keep helping him. I cannot." She pulled a key from her pocket. "This opens the service corridors. They lead to the surface. The guards change shift in 2 hours. If you go then, you might make it out." "Why are you helping me now?" Lyanna asked. "Because I watched them put a 14-year-old girl on one of those tables today," Celeste said, tears streaming down her face. "I heard her scream, and I thought of you, of what I let Victor do to you, and I could not. I cannot live with myself anymore." She pressed the key into Lyanna's hand. "I am sorry, for all of it. I know you will never forgive me, but maybe you can survive." Then she was gone, and Lyanna was alone with a key and a choice. Escape now while she could, or stay, gather more intelligence, risk the torture Victor had promised. She thought of Theron, of his warriors planning a rescue based on intelligence she had not yet gathered. She thought of the children in those cells, the ones she might be able to save if she learned where Victor kept his complete records, his list of buyers and backers. She thought of her mother's words, "Compassion is rebellion." Lyanna put the key in her pocket and did not run. Instead, she used the next 2 hours to move through the service corridors, mapping the facility, counting guards, locating the records room. She memorized everything, every detail that might help the rescue team. When she returned to her cell before the guard shift change, she had what they needed. Now, she just had to survive long enough to deliver it. 40 miles away, Theron stood in the war room and tried to contain his fury. 2 days. Lyanna had been in Victor's custody for 2 days, and they were no closer to mounting a rescue than when she had first been taken. "We do not have enough intelligence," one counselor argued. "We do not know the facility layout, the guard numbers, the security measures. Going in blind is suicide." "So we leave her there?" Theron's voice was dangerously quiet. "We abandon her to that monster?" "No one is saying abandon," Kira said, her functional right hand gripping the table edge. Her left arm hung useless, a constant reminder of the cost of their last failed mission. "We are saying be smart. Wait for better information." "Every day we wait is another day she is tortured," Theron said. "Another day Victor does gods know what to her." He slammed his fist on the table hard enough to crack the wood. The wolf was close to the surface, had been for days, howling for its mate. Only iron will kept him from shifting and running straight to that facility. Consequences be damned. "Your Majesty," one of the scouts spoke up. "We may have something. We captured one of the mercenaries on patrol. He talked." "What did he say?" Theron demanded. "The facility is underground, built into an old mine system. Main entrance here." The scout pointed to a map. "But there are 3 service tunnels for ventilation and supplies. Guards number around 50, all human, all armed with silver. And there is a shift change at midnight." Theron studied the map, his tactical mind already working through approaches and contingencies. "We hit them at midnight. 3 teams, 1 for each service tunnel. We extract Lyanna and any prisoners we find, then we burn that place to the ground." "What about Victor?" someone asked. "Do we take him alive?" Theron's expression turned cold. "That depends on what condition we find Lyanna in." They spent the next hours planning in exhaustive detail. Every contingency, every backup plan, every possible failure point. Theron would lead the main assault team through the primary service tunnel. Kira, despite her injury, insisted on commanding the second team through the eastern approach. A veteran named Henrik would secure the western tunnel. As midnight approached, Theron gathered his team. 20 warriors, all volunteers, all knowing this might be a one-way mission. "We go in fast and quiet," Theron said. "Priority is prisoner extraction. If you have to choose between killing guards and saving children, save the children. Understood?" "Understood," they chorused. "And if I give the order to retreat, you retreat. No arguments, no heroes." He looked at each of them in turn. "I have lost too many good people already. I will not lose more for pride." They moved through the forest in absolute silence, werewolf senses guiding them through darkness that would have blinded humans. The facility entrance was hidden behind false rock, but their captured mercenary had told them exactly where to look. The service tunnel entrance was a metal grate covered in vegetation. Theron lifted it silently, revealing stairs descending into earth and stone. He went first, his enhanced vision cutting through the dark, his team following in single file. The tunnel opened into a storage area stacked with supplies. 2 guards stood watch, bored and inattentive. They died before they could raise an alarm, Theron's blade opening throats with surgical precision. They moved deeper, following the directions their scout had extracted. Left at the first junction, down 2 levels, right past the generator room. And then they heard it. Screaming, a child's voice high and terrified. Theron ran. He burst into a corridor lined with cells, and what he saw there would haunt him forever. Children in cages, some barely conscious, others staring with broken eyes. Adults, too, werewolves twisted by whatever Victor had done to them. And at the end of the corridor, through a window, he saw Lyanna. She was strapped to a table, Victor standing over her with a syringe. She was not screaming yet, but Theron could see the terror in her eyes, the knowledge of what was coming. Something inside him snapped. The wolf took over. Lyanna heard the roar before she saw him. It was not a human sound, not even a normal werewolf battle cry. It was primal fury given voice, and it shook the walls. Then the window exploded inward, and Theron was there, no longer entirely human. His eyes blazed silver fire, his hands were tipped with claws, and his face had elongated into something between man and beast. Victor stumbled backward, reaching for a weapon. He never touched it. Theron had him by the throat, lifting him off the ground with one hand. "You touched what is mine," Theron growled, his voice distorted by the partial transformation. "You hurt her." "Wait," Victor gasped. "I can explain. I can offer you." Theron's claws tightened. Lyanna saw murder in his eyes, the wolf demanding blood for blood. And she understood that if he killed Victor like this, in rage rather than justice, something in him would break. "Theron," she called out, her voice steady despite the fear. "Do not. He is not worth what it will cost you." The wolf's head turned toward her, recognition flickering behind the fury. She held his gaze, willing him to remember who he was, what he stood for. "I am all right," she said. "You found me. I am all right." Slowly, so slowly, the wolf receded. Theron's features shifted back to human, though his eyes still burned with silver light. He dropped Victor, who collapsed wheezing. "Kira, secure the prisoner," Theron ordered, his voice rough but controlled. "Get Lyanna free. The rest of you, start evacuating the children." His team moved with efficient speed, unlocking cages, gathering traumatized prisoners, creating organized chaos. Theron came to Lyanna's side as Kira released the restraints, his hands gentle as he checked her for injuries. "Did he hurt you?" The question was soft, dangerous. "He was about to," Lyanna said. "You have excellent timing. But Theron, I mapped the facility. I know where his records are. Everything about his operation, his buyers, his backers. We need them or this happens again somewhere else." "Where?" Theron demanded. "His office. Upper level. But the records show more than trafficking. There is a conspiracy. Government officials, people high up. This is bigger than just him." "Then we get those records," Theron said grimly. "I am coming with you," Lyanna said. He started to protest, then nodded. "You know where his office is. We do not have time to argue." They fought their way to the upper levels, Theron cutting through guards with brutal efficiency, Lyanna behind him with the silver dagger, ready to use it if needed. They reached Victor's office, a lavish room that felt obscene in a facility devoted to torture. File cabinets lined the walls. Lyanna began pulling documents, shoving them into a bag. Financial records, shipping manifests, coded correspondence with names she recognized. Members of the Human Regent Council, nobles from both human and werewolf territories. The conspiracy went deeper than anyone had imagined. "We have what we need," Theron said. "Time to go." But Victor was there, blocking the door. He held a crossbow loaded with a silver bolt, his hands steady, his eyes cold. "You destroyed everything," he said quietly. 20 years of research, gone. "You tortured children," Theron said. "What did you expect?" "I expected to save my species," Victor replied. And then finally he told them the truth. 25 years ago, his village was attacked by a rogue werewolf pack. They killed everyone: his parents, his wife, his infant daughter. He survived only by hiding in a root cellar, listening to the screams. "I was a teacher," Victor said, his voice breaking. "I taught children to read, and in one night, werewolves destroyed everything I loved. So yes, I dedicated my life to making sure it never happens again, to giving humans a fighting chance against creatures that can tear us apart without effort." "That was a rogue pack," Theron said, "not all werewolves." "How am I supposed to know the difference?" Victor demanded. "How am I supposed to trust that the next pack I meet will not slaughter more innocents? Your kind has hunted mine for centuries. I am just returning the favor." Lyanna felt an unexpected stab of sympathy. His pain was real, his fear understandable, but it did not excuse what he had done. "I am sorry for what happened to your family," she said quietly. "No one should endure that. But you became exactly what you feared, a predator hunting the innocent. You are no different from the pack that killed your daughter." Victor flinched as if struck. The crossbow wavered. "It did not have to be this way," Theron said. "You could have chosen peace, chosen to build bridges instead of weapons. But you chose revenge, and revenge is infinite. Someone has to break the cycle." "I am too far gone for that," Victor said. "I see their faces every time I close my eyes. My wife, my little girl. I cannot stop." "Then we will stop you," Theron said. "You will stand trial, face justice. And maybe, if there is any humanity left in you, you will help us dismantle the network you built." For a long moment, Victor stood there, the crossbow pointed at them, his finger on the trigger. Lyanna saw the war behind his eyes. Continue the cycle of violence or surrender to justice. Slowly he lowered the weapon. "I am so tired," he whispered. "Then rest," Lyanna said gently. "Let it end." Guards burst into the room, but they were not Victor's mercenaries. They were Regent Council enforcers, and their leader shot Victor from behind before he could speak another word. He fell, blood spreading across the expensive carpet, his eyes wide with surprise and something that might have been relief. "Soft fool," the lead enforcer said coldly. "The program continues without you." He turned his weapon toward Theron and Lyanna. But Kira was there, crashing through the window with a roar, her functional right arm driving a blade into the enforcer's throat with deadly precision. The other guards scattered, and in the chaos that followed, Theron grabbed Lyanna and ran. They fought their way to the surface, explosives Theron's team had planted already detonating behind them. The facility collapsed in on itself, destroying evidence but also ensuring no one could use it again. By the time they reached Shadow Peak at dawn, Lyanna had been awake for 36 hours, and her body was running on pure adrenaline. But they had done it, rescued 23 prisoners, destroyed Victor's facility, obtained evidence of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. And Victor was dead, killed by the very people he had served, a traitor to his own twisted cause. 3 months passed before the trials began. Joint Human-Werewolf Tribunal, the first in history, convened to address crimes against both species. The evidence Lyanna and Theron had recovered proved invaluable. 12 Regent Council members were implicated, 8 human nobles, 3 werewolf counselors who had looked the other way in exchange for payments. The proceedings were public, broadcast throughout the territories. Survivors testified, their words condemning, but also healing. Mira spoke about her captivity, her voice steady, her brother Aidan beside her providing silent support. The 2 human children from Millbrook told their stories, their parents weeping in gratitude that someone had finally listened. Celeste testified as well. She admitted her complicity, explained her coercion by Victor's fabricated story about her non-existent daughter, and accepted full responsibility for her choices. The tribunal sentenced her to 5 years of community service working with trafficking survivors, helping to build the support systems that might prevent future victims. When it was Lyanna's turn to testify, she spoke not just about what she had seen in Victor's facility, but about what needed to change. The isolation between species that allowed fear to fester, the economic desperation that made people vulnerable to exploitation, the need for education, cooperation, genuine partnership. The tribunal listened, and when the verdicts came down, they were severe but fair. 9 council members executed for crimes against children, 3 exiled. The human king abdicated in disgrace, replaced by a reformist coalition that included both species. Darius faced judgment separately. His betrayal had cost 5 lives, but the tribunal acknowledged the impossible position Victor had placed him in. His family was found alive, held in a secondary facility, confirming his story. He was sentenced to permanent exile from the Northern Dominion, allowed to live with his rescued family in a neutral territory under supervision. When guards led him away, Theron stood to speak. "Captain Darius served this kingdom with honor for 20 years, Theron said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. He saved my life twice. His betrayal cost us dearly, but it came from love of family, not hatred of his people. That does not excuse his actions, but it explains them. May we all hope we are never forced to make such impossible choices." Darius wept as he was led away, and Theron watched his oldest friend disappear with eyes that held both grief and understanding. The trials concluded, but the real work was building something better. 6 months after Victor's death, the Joint Council was formalized. Equal representation from human and werewolf territories, binding authority over cross-species issues, funded by both governments. And they offered Lyanna a position, permanent council seat, equal voting power with the other representatives, a voice in shaping the future of human-werewolf relations. But the offer came with a condition. "You cannot serve the council and be the Alpha King's mate," Morgana said bluntly during the private meeting. "The position requires neutrality. You would have to maintain professional distance from personal entanglements that might compromise your judgment." Lyanna had known this was coming, had spent weeks considering the implications. Council seat or Theron, duty or love, the world or her heart. "May I have time to consider?" she asked. "You have 3 days," Morgana said. Lyanna found Theron on the battlements that evening, his usual refuge when decisions weighed heavy. The sun was setting, painting the forest in shades of gold and crimson. He looked up as she approached, and the connection between them flared to life, warm and certain. "They told you," he said. "It was not a question." "Yes." "What are you going to do?" Lyanna leaned against the stone parapet beside him. "I do not know. If I take the seat, I can help millions of people. Build the peace we fought for. Make sure what Victor did never happens again." "But?" Theron prompted gently. "But I would have to give up us," Lyanna finished. "Maintain professional distance. No personal relationship that might create conflicts of interest. And I do not know if I can do that. I do not know if I want to." Theron was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the sunset. Then he spoke. "I have spent my whole life choosing duty over personal happiness, watching my father do the same. It is what good leaders do, supposedly, sacrifice themselves for the greater good." He turned to face her fully. "But I have also watched that sacrifice hollow people out, turn them bitter. My father died alone, surrounded by advisors but loved by no one, because he never let anyone close enough." "What are you saying?" Lyanna asked. "I am saying you should take the council seat," Theron said, "and I am saying we will figure out how to make it work, together." "The council wants me to maintain distance," Lyanna said. "No personal relationships that might compromise judgment." "The council is operating on old assumptions," Theron replied. "The idea that love and duty cannot coexist. But you and I have already proven otherwise. We disagreed on the hybrid research vote last month. I publicly opposed your position. Did that feel like compromised judgment?" Lyanna smiled despite herself. "No, it felt like 2 people who respect each other enough to disagree professionally." "Exactly," Theron said. "We can establish new protocols, mandatory recusals when conflicts arise, transparent disclosure of our relationship, independent oversight. We will hold ourselves to a higher standard precisely because of our connection, not in spite of it." "You want to rewrite the rules," Lyanna said. "I want to show them a better way," Theron corrected. "Partnership without possession, love without compromise of principle. Is that not what we have been building all along?" He was right. Their relationship had never been about dominance or submission. It was respect, challenge, growth. They made each other better, not weaker. "I need to think," Lyanna said. "Take your time," Theron said. "I'm not going anywhere." But Lyanna realized she did not need more time. The answer was already clear. The next morning, she went to the council chamber and delivered her response. "I accept the council seat," she said to the assembled members, "but not under the terms you offered." Morgana raised an eyebrow. "Explain." The rule about maintaining distance from personal relationships is based on outdated assumptions, Lyanna said. It assumes that love and duty cannot coexist. But Theron and I have proven otherwise. We disagree on policy regularly. We maintain professional boundaries. Our personal relationship enhances, rather than compromises, our judgment, because we challenge each other to think beyond our own biases. You ask us to trust you, one counselor said skeptically. No, Lyanna said. I ask you to trust the systems we will put in place, mandatory recusals when conflicts arise, transparent disclosure of our relationship, independent oversight of our decisions. We will hold ourselves to a higher standard precisely because of our connection. The council debated for 3 hours. Arguments flew back and forth, concerns raised and addressed. Finally, Morgana called for a vote. 7 in favor of accepting Lyanna with the new protocols, 3 opposed, 2 abstentions. Welcome to the Joint Council, Morgana said with something that might have been approval. Do not make us regret this flexibility. When Lyanna emerged from the chamber, Theron was waiting in the corridor. She did not have to speak. He saw the answer in her eyes. You chose both, he said, wonder in his voice. I chose us, Lyanna corrected. The real us. Partners who make each other better. Is that not worth fighting for? Always, Theron said. He kissed her there in the corridor, not caring who saw, and Lyanna felt the mate bond settle into place like a key turning in a lock. Not possession, but recognition. Not destiny, but choice. That evening, the Joint Council held its first official session with Lyanna as a full member. The agenda was ambitious. Expanding integration academies, establishing joint security forces, creating economic partnerships that would benefit both species. The first major vote was on allowing limited hybrid research, the ethical version using Victor's science for healing rather than weapons. The goal was to help werewolves who struggled with transformation due to medical conditions, applying the knowledge Victor had gained through evil means toward genuinely beneficial purposes. Lyanna voted in favor, believing the knowledge could help thousands who suffered. Theron voted against, concerned about potential misuse and the symbolic message of validating any part of Victor's work. The measure passed by a narrow margin. When the session ended, Theron approached her formally, for the record. I disagree with Councillor Thorne's vote, he said, using her official title, and I have concerns about the safeguards in place. I understand your concerns, Lyanna replied with equal formality, and I respect your position, even though I reached a different conclusion based on the evidence presented. But I trust your judgment, Theron added quietly, just for her, even when it differs from mine. It was a small moment, witnessed by half the council, but it set the precedent that would define their partnership. Love without control, respect without submission, equals who chose each other freely and chose their principles even when they disagreed. The weeks that followed established the new normal. Lyanna worked with the council during the day, developing policies and negotiating agreements. She and Theron debated positions, sometimes agreeing, sometimes not. When conflicts of interest arose, they recused themselves according to the protocols they had established, and in the evenings, they were simply themselves. Partners who had fought their way through darkness together and come out the other side transformed. 1 month after Lyanna joined the council, Kira requested a meeting. The former guard commander had been adapting to life with her paralyzed left arm, learning to fight one-handed, refusing to let the injury define her. I want to establish a training program, Kira said, for warriors who have been injured. Show them that disability does not mean the end of service. Lyanna brought the proposal to the council. It passed unanimously, with Theron abstaining since it involved his own military. The program launched within weeks, and Kira found new purpose training the next generation of fighters, proving that strength came in many forms. Mira and Aiden had also found their paths forward. Mira, after months of therapy to address her trauma, began training as an advocate for trafficking survivors. Her first-hand experience gave her credibility and insight that helped countless others navigate their own recovery. Aiden joined the Joint Security Forces, determined to prevent other families from suffering as his had. Celeste completed her community service with quiet dignity, running rehabilitation programs that genuinely helped survivors rebuild their lives. She and Lyanna would never have a close relationship, but they had found a kind of mutual respect born from shared understanding of impossible choices and hard-won redemption. The integration moved forward, sometimes smoothly, often with friction. There were setbacks and challenges, factions that opposed change, economic disruptions as old systems adapted to new realities. But slowly, measurably, progress happened. Integration academies opened, with human and werewolf children learning together. Joint security forces proved effective at preventing the trafficking operations that had once thrived in the gaps between jurisdictions. Trade agreements created economic incentives for cooperation rather than conflict. It was not perfect, but it was better, and every day they worked to make it better still. 9 months after joining the council, Lyanna was reviewing reports in her office when a messenger arrived with urgent news. A delegation from the Southern Pax had sent formal communication. They had heard of the integration efforts in the Northern Dominion, and they were not pleased. The message was clear. Change is coming to the north. We are watching. Be prepared. Lyanna brought the message to the emergency council session that evening. Theron read it, his expression darkening. The Southern Pax have always been more traditional, he said, more isolated. They see integration as weakness, dilution of werewolf purity. Then we need to be ready, Lyanna said, because they are right about one thing. Change has come to the north, and we are not going back. The council voted to increase border security and open diplomatic channels with the South. It would not be easy. There would be resistance, possibly conflict. But Lyanna and Theron had faced worse and survived. That night, in their private quarters, they stood together on the balcony overlooking the palace grounds. Below them, the Integration Academy students were having a festival, human and werewolf children playing together in the torchlight, their laughter carrying on the wind. It is working, Lyanna said softly. Everything we fought for, it is actually working. For now, Theron said, the South will test us. Other challenges will come. Peace requires constant tending. I know, Lyanna said. She leaned against him, his arm coming around her waist in a gesture that had become second nature. But at least now we face it together. Together, Theron agreed. Always. They stayed like that as the stars emerged overhead. Two people who had grabbed at each other in desperation in a moonlit garden and built something neither could have imagined. Not a fairy tale. Not a simple happily ever after. But something better, something real. A partnership forged in fire and tempered through sacrifice. Love that had survived betrayal and loss and impossible choices. A peace built not on the absence of conflict, but on the commitment to keep choosing understanding over fear, cooperation over isolation, the difficult path over the easy one. The Southern Pax would come eventually. New challenges would arise. The work would never be finished. But Lyanna touched the silver locket at her throat, her mother's final gift, and thought of Eleanor's last words. Use your gift to build bridges. She had built those bridges, between species, between enemies, between duty and love. The bridges swayed in the wind sometimes, required constant maintenance, were never quite finished. But they stood, and tomorrow she and Theron would wake and continue the work, together, always together. That was leadership, that was love, that was the price and the privilege of building a better world, and they would pay it gladly, for as long as breath remained in their bodies. The story of the Alpha King and the human girl who grabbed him in a garden would be told for generations, a story of desperate choices and hard-won redemption, of sacrifice and partnership, of two people who refused to accept the world as it was and built something better instead. This was not an ending, it was only a beginning, but it was a beginning worth fighting for.